On this episode of China Uncensored, trade war, huh? Good God, what is it good for? Well, it's actually complicated. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. My favorite topic, war. It makes great headlines and is good for views. Except when it's a trade war. Then eyes kind of start to gloss over, even mine. But what's happening right now between the United States and China is actually super interesting, because President Donald Trump has done something truly unusual for a US president, at least when it comes to China. He's kept a campaign promise. Here he is 2 years ago at the 2016 Republican National Convention.
Our horrible trade agreements with China and many others will be totally renegotiated. We are going to enforce all trade violations against any country that cheats.
And here he is last week.
With that being said, China has been taking advantage of the United States for many years. Really, if you look at it, since the start of the World Trade Organization, and they have really done a number on this country.
Weird. It's the same message. And over the past year, it seems Trump has actually been taking the Chinese government to task, on trade issues at least. In August 2017, he launched 2 probes into unfair trade practices by China and other countries in the steel and aluminum industries. Then in January this year, he imposed tariffs on solar panels and washing machines, which is basically a tariff on China since China makes so many of them. And then in March, President Trump followed through with tariffs on steel and aluminum. And some began to worry about a trade war. The Chinese Communist Party certainly wasn't happy.
We
will not hesitate to immediately make a fierce counterstrike. We are not ruling out any options for retaliation.
Are hugs an option? Because I'm ready to export. Wait, what's that, Shelley? China has a 25% tariff on hug imports? Forget that. So, the question is, as in any war, are we all gonna die? Doesn't China own tons of US debt? There's almost a $400 billion trade deficit, stocks have been up and down, and China makes most of the world's umbrellas. If it rains in New York, am I gonna get wet? Yes, we will all get a little wet. Here's what happened next. The Chinese government put their own tariffs on $3 billion worth of US imports. Trump responded by threatening more tariffs on another $50 billion in Chinese goods. Then China did the same. And now Trump has called for the biggest tariffs yet on $100 billion worth of Chinese imports. And then Xi Jinping said that when Trump's mama sits around the house, she sits around the house. And then Trump released a diss track called "No More Chocolate Cake for You." The point is, a lot of what's going on right now is trash talk. Both sides are trying to raise the stakes to see who backs down first. But should the US put tariffs on Chinese goods? Well, that's something the US Commerce Department had actually recommended back in February. So Trump imposed those tariffs. And then a miracle happened. Democrats agreed with Trump. Like Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
I don't agree with President Trump on a whole lot. But today, I want to give him a big pat on the back. He is doing the right thing when it comes to China.
Even Senator Elizabeth Warren supports the tariffs.
When President Trump says he's putting tariffs on the table, I think tariffs are one part of reworking our trade policy overall.
And perhaps most surprising of all, fake news CNN is willing to give tariffs a shot.
Let's be honest, on one big fundamental point, Donald Trump is right. China is a trade cheat.
How heartwarming. No matter how deep our political divisions, we can still be united by the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is a dirty cheater. That doesn't mean the tariffs are perfect or have everyone's support. The Chinese Communist Party may be cheating, but imposing tariffs is only a partial solution to some of the bigger trade problems. And in the short term, tariffs make things more expensive, so that could also hurt US consumers. That being said, the Chinese Communist Party has refused to play by the rules of the World Trade Organization, so tariffs may be the best available option. Tariffs are like ordering a salad at McDonald's. It's not what you really want, but it's at least a less unhealthy option than everything else. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 thanks partly to lobbying from former presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. They wanted to give U.S. businesses access to the China market. And in particular, President Clinton pitched the idea that if China's economy opens up, it would force the government to make political reforms. Well, that definitely worked. Or not. And while U.S. businesses have gotten access to the Chinese market, many of them are getting their intellectual property stolen by their Chinese joint venture partners. And according to this report from the United States Trade Representative, when it comes to exports, the Chinese government has been subsidizing local manufacturers like steel and aluminum factories, and that's allowed it to dump goods on the U.S. market at unfairly low prices. Chinese leaders have repeatedly failed to follow through with commitments to facilitate free trade. And the Chinese Communist Party has been increasingly creating an unfair environment for foreign companies. The problem is, when China entered the WTO, the Chinese Communist Party knew that Western companies were desperate to access over 1 billion potential customers in China. So desperate that the party could cheat and get away with it. It's like when you're the only kid in your neighborhood with a Nintendo Switch. They're coming over to play no matter how much of a jerk you are. If a trade war does start, it might hurt the U.S. in the short term. For example, U.S. consumers would face rising prices. But in a trade war, the country that's a net exporter has the most to lose, and that's China. As the New York Times says, exports account for a big share of Chinese economic growth. Because the United States buys so much from China, Washington has many more ways to hit Chinese manufacturers. The Chinese Communist Party depends on a stable economy to justify its rule, and the economy is already struggling with bad debt, capital flight, and corruption, just to name a few of the problems. So if there was a trade war, China would be hurt more than the U.S. But will there be a trade war? That's not clear yet. Like I said earlier, right now it's still mostly trash talk. And trash talk is, of course, Trump's original superpower, which has confused the heck out of Chinese leaders. According to this article, top-level Chinese officials are desperately asking American experts whether Trump is serious or just bluffing. Well, maybe those Chinese officials need to watch China Uncensored, because we predicted this last year, right after Trump took office. Click the link below to check out our episode, Who Would Win a U.S.-China Trade War? But it's not just Trump's trash talk that's throwing Chinese officials for a loop. Last week, Trump suggested that maybe America should consider rejoining the TPP trade deal, which he had rejected last year as a bad deal. But it is a good way to put pressure on China. And there are signs that the Chinese Communist Party could be caving to the pressure. Chinese leader Xi Jinping recently made a speech pledging to open the Chinese economy and cut tariffs. Although Xi's speech was also pretty similar to one he made last year, so it's unclear whether it means the Chinese Communist Party will actually make any changes. It could be just more talk. Of course, China's foreign ministry wants you to know that if there are changes, pressure has nothing to do with it.
I can definitely tell you that China's announcement of the significant initiatives on further opening up is not related to the current economic and trade conflicts between China and the United States.
Absolutely not. It's probably because Donald Trump and Xi Jinping are such great friends. Like Pooh Bear and Tigger. I know they said Obama was Tigger, but really, Trump is the right color. So what do you think of Trump's tariffs on China and the possibility of a trade war? Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. See you next time. For years, Western businesses have put up with a lot of sketchy things in order to gain access to the China market. That includes never advertising with, say, YouTubers critical of the Chinese Communist Party. That's why China Uncensored relies on financial support from viewers like you. Click the orange button to visit patreon.com/ChinaUncensored and find out how you can support our show.